Good evening. My name is Christiana Zilke. I am president of the League of Women Voters of Berrien and Cass counties. I want to welcome all of you here this evening. Appreciate your coming out in this weather, and thank you very much for coming. Radio station WGTO is here and will be broadcasting this event live on AM 910, on FM 101.1, and will be streaming it on the internet at wgtoradio.com. For those who would like to see and hear the event again, you may do that. And why not suggest to your friends that they do that too? We are making a video recording and will be posting it online thanks to an equipment purchase grant from the Pokagon Fund. We applied for the grant and we're so pleased to receive it. The League of Women Voters is proud to be a support group in the electoral process. All across America, at the local, state, and national levels, the League is the one nonpartisan organization that consistently works to promote good government and encourages citizens to become informed and to vote. If you want to be a part of this team, we would be happy to have you become a member. You can find a membership form at the check-in on your way out. Our co-sponsors for our debate series this year are the Berrien County Bar Association, Dowagiac Rotary, the Four Flags Area Chamber of Commerce, the Greater Dowagiac Chamber of Commerce, Harbor Country Chamber of Commerce, Leader Publications, Delta Kappa Gamma Society International, and the Rotary Club of the Three Oaks area. Thanks to the League members who made this event possible and to those working here tonight. Our special thanks go out to Southwestern Michigan College and its president, Dr. David Matthews, and to his staff for the use of this facility. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce our moderator for the Michigan House District 59 debate. He is Michael Caldwell, publisher of Leader Publications, which produces the Cassopolis Vigilant, Edwardsburg Argus, Dowagiac Daily News, Niles Daily Star, and a special publication, Off the Water. He will be our guide through tonight's debate. Mike?
Thank you, Chris. Again, welcome to the debate featuring the two candidates for the office of State Representative for the 59th House District of the state of Michigan. On November 4, District 59 voters will decide which one of the two candidates seated up here today will represent this district in the Michigan House in Lansing. Matt Laurie, your current District 59 representative, is term limited and cannot run for re-election. And as Chris said, I will be the moderator for tonight's debate. I'll be asking questions of the candidates provided by the sponsors and also then questions that are submitted by you, the audience. The citizens of District 59 know that good government does not just happen. Citizens have a responsibility to choose their elected officials wisely, and these officials, in turn, are expected to consider the common good of the entire community in all of their deliberations and decisions. Each of the candidates in this debate has agreed to follow a few basic rules. We will begin the program this evening with 2 minutes of opening remarks from each candidate. Then, as moderator, I will ask questions of the candidates provided by the sponsors first, and then questions submitted by the audience. The candidates will have a set amount of time, 2 minutes, to answer each question. There will be no rebuttals. Please write out your questions on one of the index cards provided or on your own paper and hand them to a League of Women Voters volunteer. And they're wearing buttons or stickers, and you can look around and find them. Please write your questions legibly and very briefly. They should be questions, not statements, and deal with issues. One question per card, please, and then the questions will be reviewed for relevance and duplication before putting them to the candidates. If you do not have a card but want one, please raise your hand now, and League members will be picking up cards during the debate. So just signal to them if you have a question card ready. When we have finished with the questioning, each candidate will give a 2-minute concluding statement. Our timer for this evening is League member Jeff Gilbert, and he will hold up a yellow paddle when 30 seconds of answer time remains and a red paddle when time is up. We ask the candidates to observe these rules and to stop when they see the red paddle. We also ask the audience to listen silently and respectfully and refrain from any demonstrations of enthusiasm for candidates or their answers to any questions. We can give them both a round of applause at the end, as indeed anyone willing to run for office and serve certainly deserves our thanks. So we will begin the opening statements with Aaron Miller. Mr. Miller.
Thank you very much, Mike, and thank you to the public for coming on out. This is a wonderful event, and it is all to the credit of the League of Women Voters once again and their sponsors. So thank you to John and Susan and Mrs. I can't remember your name, I'm sorry. Thank you to you all for hosting us. It's a great event, and I am pleased to be able to share my views and the facts that they're based upon. My name is Aaron Miller, and I'm from Sturgis, Michigan. I'm 27 years old, but I think that is to my greatest advantage. I think we need energy, and we need a drive to do what's best for our district for this next election, and that's why I'm running. My wife and I have lived in the district our entire lives, both born and raised in Sturgis, and I would like to see positive change in the next 6 years in our district. And that involves energy, that involves looking up the facts, and that involves looking at the data, how they stand. I'm running because I do believe that a small difference can be made by one person. Too often nowadays, people believe our country is too far gone to even make a difference anymore, and so many people have given up on our nation, given up on our state, given up on politics. We all know this to be true, Democrats and Republicans and independents. Too many people have given up. And it is time to believe that we individuals can make a difference, and it takes standing up for what we believe in and exercising our rights, and that is to vote. So that's why we're here. Once again, thank you to the League for having us. I look forward to a wonderful forum. I hope to make it all about information. So thank you so much for coming. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. And now, Mike Morose.
I would like to thank the League of Women Voters, sponsors, and SMC for providing the venue tonight. I am Mike Morose, and I want to be your next state representative. When I ran for this seat 2 years ago, I saw an effort to drastically change the state of Michigan. And I warned that if voters continue to vote against their own best interest based solely on party lines, or if you are a one-issue voter, we were destined to head in the wrong direction. One party runs the entire state, and I believe it's time to bring balance back to the state legislature. Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? If you are a teacher or a school staff member, if you are a senior with a pension, if you are a woman looking for cancer screenings or exams, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? If you are a low-income worker or a parent looking for the child tax deduction, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? How about your roads? They are definitely worse than they were 4 years ago. We can do better. I envision a balanced legislature which will allow public input before the law is enacted. I will communicate with the people and department leaders to ask how the legislation will impact you before voting on this legislation that's on my desk. Do not allow professional or party obligation to dictate your support of a candidate. Not an employer, nor a spouse, not even a church, should dictate your vote. Your vote is your own voice, and when you are in the booth, make sure it is you and only you that makes the final decision. My experience in the labor force, as a business owner, and as a community volunteer have prepared me to take on the challenges of being your next representative. I have gone through the school of hard knocks, and I know how difficult it can be. I want to be your advocate. I want to be your voice in a place that lately has been hard of hearing. I thank you for being here, and I'm looking forward to our discussion tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Morose. It is now time to begin our questions for the candidates. As I said before, their answers must be limited to no more than 2 minutes. If that time period is exceeded, I will intervene. Here is the first question. Mr. Miller, you will be answering first. Tax breaks in Michigan total more than $30 billion each year. There are so many it took an 87-page state government report to document them. Almost everyone gets a tax break. but some more than others. Should Michigan consider a more neutral tax structure with fewer winners and losers, or at least one more efficient and possibly more fair?
To clarify, do you mean income tax or do you mean business taxes or generally taxes all around?
I believe the intention is overall, but primarily for business tax.
Okay. I have agreed all along that we ought not to see any special winners and any losers left out of funding. The problem when you designate a specific industry to receive funding is that you leave somebody else out. And that's great that they're getting additional funding, but we often call these corporate tax breaks. When you give a tax break to any certain industry or any certain company, someone does get left out. And is the money worth it anyway? It is an issue of fairness. We need to be fair to all our businesses, and all our businesses need the same chance. And that goes for just about any other tax, whether it's businesses or individuals. Yes, I'm for a fair tax, absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Mr. Morose?
The Michigan business tax was repealed, and that cut business taxes by $1.7 billion a year. Unfortunately, increased individual taxes by $1.4 billion. So what happened was the business taxes were cut, but it was put on the middle class. It's exactly what happened. I think that's unfortunate, and I think it's unfair. They did this by eliminating tax credits. They taxed our pensions, as many of you are aware of, and that's what has happened. I want to say this. If we are going to give tax breaks to corporations, we must make a hard and firm fact that these tax breaks are going to be tied to job creation. So many times we're promised so many things about these tax breaks, companies coming in and promising the world, and they're not tied directly. They're not held responsible for creating jobs. They're not being held responsible to a lot of things. So if we are going to give these tax breaks, let's make it fair across the board. Let's not punish the middle class while we're giving breaks to the upper class. And also let's tie these breaks to hard and fast jobs and efficiencies.
Thank you, Mr. Morose. For the second question, you will begin. It is about education. In 2012, a suburban Chicago high school district, District 214, had an operating cost per pupil of $17,923, far from the highest in the state. The average tuition of private schools in the U.S. is $25,000. Michigan's current per pupil foundation level is $7,126. Since 1995 and Proposal A, the sole source of operating funds for most districts. In 2008, it was $7,620. This is a $500 per pupil cut in 6 years, while expenses have continued to climb. Meanwhile, the test scores of Michigan students have declined, making Michigan one of the lowest achieving states. Should districts be allowed to self-tax once again? Has the worthy goal of equalizing educational opportunity hurt all students rather than helped any? What is the answer?
Well, the $7,100 has been pretty consistent for 10 years. And we know what's happened to costs in the last 10 years. So 10 years ago, we were basically at $7,100, and today we are at about $7,100 per pupil. But what have costs done? Costs have gone through the roof of everything you can think of, especially to educate a child. So it is definitely stagnant. Also, the reality of the $7,100 doesn't mean that that money is going to be spent. That's just a targeted amount for budgeting purposes. And so the $7,100 actually may or may not be spent depending upon how much revenue will be coming in. So that's kind of a squishy number there that isn't really solid. I think our problem with public education is the fact that a lot of money is being siphoned off away from public education, and a large part of that is because of the privatization of education. I do not believe that education should be a for-profit endeavor. We have charter schools, private for-profit schools, that are removing dollars from public education. That's part of our problem. That money needs to come back to the public education system, back to the classrooms, back to the students, so that we can take care of our funding, and I think that's where I would start originally.
Thank you, Mr. Morose. Mr. Miller?
To answer the question, is it the time to allow schools to individually tax? I would say no. And the numbers point to in the last 4 years, education funding has gone up. And not only that, but the foundation grant funding from the state has gone up. It is $41 per pupil funding. So you can look at that afterward, but it has gone up. What has been a large duty of the state is to pour money into our unfunded liabilities. That is a major cost of what education funding must go to now. And so we need to take a look at, are those unfunded liabilities worth it in the end? Because we can only dump $41 more over the last 4 years into education. But education spending has gone up $1 billion over the last 4 years. The numbers speak for themselves from the Senate Fiscal Agency. And so to answer the original question, I don't think it's the time to allow schools to tax individually.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. You will begin our third question, which is focused on attracting businesses. The schools are underfunded and student achievement has dropped. The roads in Michigan are inadequate and poorly maintained, with Michigan ranking 50th among the states in spending per driver. Internet connections are generally slow and unreliable, certainly in Southwest Michigan. Why would a business want to locate in Michigan given these realities?
Well, that's a lot of details, but a lot of those hardships exist in the rest of America right now. The point is, Michigan is on the rebound as far as job growth and as far as a lot of those go. Now, roads, we do need a change. We are in gridlock in Lansing, and the fact is that's not me, but we do need a change because roads are a big factor with businesses. And so I'll just touch on roads. You are right in that we are 50th in per capita road funding for the nation. 50th in per capita, that's per person. And we have the 6th highest gas taxes in the nation. The first solution, number one, is that our gas taxes, which were meant for transportation in the beginning, they do need to go to fund our roads. And to answer to hit on just one point, that is solution number one. Roads and transportation is probably number one for businesses, and everything else comes after. So that is one solution right there that we need to do right now. Our road taxes, depending, yes, it goes to fund many other things right now, but we need to take a look at what our funding is meant for in the first place and have it go towards those places. Simple as that.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Mr. Morose?
Michigan roads are the worst I've ever seen, and Michigan used to have the best roads in the country. Businesses are not attracted to Michigan because of these roads. And it's not just roads, it's infrastructure. We have bridges, we have our ports, not here in this district, of course, but throughout the state. All of this needs to be looked at. There needs to be a comprehensive plan to redo our infrastructure and our roads. I would look at our appropriations. There are 40 cents, I believe, that come off of the gas pump. 21 cents of that goes to roads, whether it be MDOT, local road commissions in cities and villages. The other portion of that goes into essentially the general fund, which are paid for many different things. I would look at where that money's going before we put another tax on ourselves. Look at where those dollars are going, because they're in the general fund. And you know what happens to money when it's in the general fund? It tends to be used, it tends to be wasted a lot of times. So before we do that, let's take a look at those appropriations, reappropriate what we have. And then from there, if we do need additional funding, we'll have to look at it. And we can look at it by a township basis, a county by county basis. I would be much more comfortable paying into my township. Well, I live in the city of Dowagiac, but my county, for instance, if I know my dollars, my road dollars, are going to stay locally, instead of putting those dollars into the state fund and not knowing if you're going to get any benefit from that. So let me say in short that good roads are good for business. Good roads is good business. And if we start fixing our roads, we're creating jobs too. Now those jobs are going to be great as far as bringing people back to work, Those jobs will be there to bring dollars back into our funding and back to us as well. So definitely, the roads are absolute priority when it comes to jobs, education. All these things are tied together.
Thank you, Mr. Moroz. You will begin with question number 4, which is focused on helping Michigan's youth. At a recent youth-led candidate forum in Kalamazoo, high school students told candidates about issues important to them: remedies for the teen dropout rate, teen pregnancy and sexually transmitted diseases, the need for more and accessible after-school programs, struggling families impacted by social services, cuts to programs like food stamps, and mental health services for youth before they encounter run-ins with the juvenile justice system. How would you respond to these young people? How well does Michigan serve its young people and families in trouble?
Let's look at some statistics here, and I'm not one to just layer statistics on people, but I think these are very important, and this is for our district. Children ages 0 through 17 living in poverty, nearly 25% of our children in that age category live in poverty, and that's in this district. It's about the same, it's a little bit less for the entire state. Students eligible for free and reduced price lunches, 60% of those children are eligible for free or reduced price lunch, where it's only 47% in the state of Michigan. In this district, median household income, $44,000, where it's $48,000 for the state. Children born to mothers with no diploma or GTE, nearly 29% versus 16% in the state of Michigan. I could go on here. Infant mortality is 11 per 1,000 in this district, where it's 7.6 in the state. We have a definite problem, and we must fund those programs that keep these kids out of trouble, that help the families. So many of these families are low income. Let's start paying our people. Let's start creating a living wage so these people have an opportunity to take care of their kids properly, so that these kids have an opportunity to have a decent start at a decent education and start that cycle again of educating and getting good jobs and starting that cycle once again. The cycle has been broken. The cycle has been broken because we're parcelizing all of these issues and we're not looking at it at a holistic manner. And that's how I would do it.
Thank you, Mr. Moroz. Mr. Miller?
And the way you create a living wage is by making an environment that is friendly to jobs in the first place. People need a job to get a living wage in the first place, and so I think that combats poverty, number one. We've looked at the symptoms of the problem, but the root of the problem is simply the destruction of the family. Too many single parents are raising kids on their own, and they have 5, 6, you name it, however many, and that's not the best solution. The solution, and I'll agree on a certain point, we have programs in place like Big Brother, Big Sister, and I think we can all agree on this one. Big Brother, Big Sister, Boys and Girls Clubs of America is at my school. I wish it were at schools more often in Michigan. Those programs are there not to replace the parent, but to work towards that goal. As much as we can replace a father or a mother figure or just a mentor figure, whether that's a teacher, a counselor, an after-school program mentor, regardless, we need to look at creating that mentorship, that education for those children that they are missing right now with the destruction of the family. These statistics, according to the U.S. Census, the poverty rate for single parents with children in the U.S. was 37.1%. The rate for married couples with children was 6.8%. That's a huge difference. What's missing is the parenting, the education, and the mentorship. So replacing that any way we can is imperative.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. You will begin answering our fifth question first, and that is on health care. Where do you stand on providing health care or health insurance for all Americans?
Well, first off, I don't think it is a constitutional duty for our government to provide health care to all individuals. We are not in a universal system where that's the government duty. We are inching there. Now, We want the government to make it easier. And so let's look at ways where if someone is all alone, where we can create a co-op. But as far as providing health care, I don't believe it's the government's job or duty to provide that health care. We need to make it easy by enrolling people in, perhaps if they are all alone, it's a single payer, perhaps they join a group. But the solution is not the government funding that insurance. The government funding anything has shown in history not to be efficient. And those are the simple facts.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Mr. Morose.
Well, I believe we have a moral obligation to provide at least an opportunity for everyone to have insurance. Now, the government is not providing insurance. The healthcare system we have now, the Affordable Care Act, for instance, that's run through private industry. That's run through private corporations. It is a business opportunity. This is not a handout. The Affordable Care Act is definitely run through the market. I'm afraid that if we start retracting where we've come so far, we are going to lose our local health care. And by that I mean the health services that will be provided for the new healthcare clinic in Cassopolis that's going to serve Cass and Berrien counties. That came from the Affordable Care Act. $4.4 million went into building that building. So I cannot imagine going backwards to what I call the dark ages of healthcare, where people are thrown off because of pre-existing conditions or all these other nightmares that you've heard about. That healthcare center in Cassopolis is there for a good reason. They've worked hard at putting that together. There's also one in Centerville, and that one as well will serve the people of St. Joseph County. And it's those types of dollars that will allow the entire community, not just the wealthy, to have health care, but everyone from all walks of life, all socioeconomic backgrounds. And this is still a pay-as-you-go deal. It's not a freebie. This is a pay-as-you-go program, and I support that. It's our obligation.
Thank you, Mr. Morose. You will address our next question first, and it's about government. Name what you think are the 3 most essential services the state of Michigan provides its citizens, other than education, because that has already been covered. And then tell us if you think the state is funding each adequately and how you would rate the performance.
Well, I believe we need to have fair opportunity for jobs. We need to have well-paying, well-benefited jobs. Those jobs are critical to society. It's what keeps the wheels turning. Without those jobs, the revenues aren't there. So I believe the state of Michigan could do a better job in creating an environment for business growth. It can do a better job creating an environment to bring businesses into the state. And how can we do that? Well, we can do that by fixing our roads, and I know we've covered that. So if we fix our roads, we're bringing those jobs and that business growth back. Infrastructure is another item. That's another item we need. It's just the environment to grow these businesses. It's the education that we have to provide the training for the jobs that will be created, and the infrastructure in order to get there.
Thank you, Mr. Morose. Mr. Miller.
I think the 3 most essential services other than education, to list them off, would be 1, our security. Our Michigan State Police and ultimately our county police and local police, security is important to us in America more than ever. We live in a world where security has changed and everybody is worried about, 40 years ago you could send your daughter off to school and walk through city streets and that wasn't thought of. Now times have changed, so security would probably be high on the list. Number 2, environment, and 3, transportation. Our security is adequately funded and was not last decade. Governor Granholm cut state police and then added to her own state police detail. So where does the history lie? Our environment. There is no X amount in my mind where our environment needs to be funded. And so at this time, I don't have an answer as to, do we need more dollars for our environment? The DEQ's mission is to protect our environment to the fullest extent and work with commerce. That's their mission, to work with commerce and the environment to see that both are used sustainably. And number 3, transportation. We've already discussed road funding. The important thing is to update our infrastructure, and that takes putting our funding where it should be. Very simply, those 3 things: security, environment, transportation. Those 3 things are the most important things after education for the state of Michigan.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. You will begin on question 7 about privatization. The idea of privatizing government services is much in vogue now as a way to save taxpayer money, despite concerns about oversight and the rewards that are actually being realized. Much has been written and said this year about problems with Aramark's performance of its contract to provide food services for state prisons. Do you support privatization of government services in Michigan? If so, which services and why? And if not, why not?
Of course I do. New York has privatized services for many of their government functions. Every government is going to, at some point, employ privatized services for their government. That's inevitable. The question is, are they following the standards that they're supposed to? Are they doing their job? If so, then great. If not, you're fired. And that's pretty simple. But as far as services, you mentioned Aramark. Aramark is doing a poor job, get them out of there. I'm not in favor of keeping them. If they're doing a bad job, then they're fired. And if that means going back to public-run prisons until we find an alternative, then that's what we need to do. We need to find the alternative that does the job, and that is simply what we must do.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Mr. Morose?
I'm not going to say that we shouldn't privatize some items, but what we've seen is a mad rush to over-privatize so many things that we've actually have run into a lot of problems. I touched on charter schools, privatizing the education of our children. I think that's improper, it's incorrect. And we see that charter schools do not play by the same rules. They don't have to worry about transportation. They don't have to worry about what segment of the K through 12 is educated. They can pick and choose. They often don't have to worry about building maintenance. I think that's unfair. Those private schools are not having to stand up to the same scrutiny as public education. Let me touch on prisons. We've seen very quickly here how Aramark and the prison food system has really dropped the ball. Well, we should have seen that coming. And we also see a company that GEO Group, which is now expanding prisons with no prisoners for it. They're anticipating an increase in the prisoner population. They're looking forward to making profit on prisoners. I think that's wrong. What does that encourage? It encourages unfair sentencing. It encourages keeping prisoners in prison longer just so they can make a buck. I think we need to focus on how we keep people out of prisons. Let's look at ways to reduce the prison population instead of increasing the population. And let me say something about the Michigan correction officers. They are the best trained in the country. Let's put our faith in those professionals who've been doing this their entire lives, who actually make careers out of these jobs. Let's put our faith into those people and let them do the job they're supposed to do.
Thank you, Mr. Morose. You will take the next question first, and it builds off of that one and is about prisons. In Michigan, we spend many times more on each prisoner than we do on each student, and we incarcerate a large number of people. Specifically, 21% of the state's budget in 2013 went to corrections, and the cost per prisoner is more than $30,000. How do you think we can responsibly bring prison costs down to a more reasonable level?
The correction system costs us about $2 billion a year, and that amounts to about 50,000 prisoners. And like I mentioned before, we need to reduce the prison population. We need to find ways to reduce the prison population. A lot of those people in prisons have mental illness. And I believe that if it's nonviolent mental illness, they need to be somewhere else, not in a state prison where a company can make a profit on them. So some of these nonviolent type of prisoners need to be taken out and put into institutions that can be used to help rehabilitate them and get them back on the street and perhaps onto a useful life. I believe that when you privatize, you're filling the jails, for instance, the prisons with unprofessional, untrained, unpaid workers. There's going to be a loss there. There's going to be a huge turnover in employment there. These employees are coming in, a lot of them are cheating, they're smuggling, they're not doing their jobs effectively or efficiently. That's where we're losing a lot of money as well. So let's keep our professionals in place. And let's reduce the prison populations. Let's look at the sentencing guidelines for nonviolent offenders. There are many things we can look at to reduce the costs, and I don't believe that privatization is really going to get us that far down the road.
Thank you, Mr. Morose. Mr. Miller.
I do not believe turning out our criminals onto the streets is a good idea as far as our security.
Never said that.
No rebuttals, please.
I do not believe that turning out our criminals onto the streets is a good thing for our security. And I don't think it costs us less money in the long run. If we are paying so much for prisons, let's look at the root of the problem. It goes to staffing. And one of the solutions for staffing is to privatize. And so one of the reasons for high costs is public pensions, public staffing, and that's one of the reasons for the cost. You'd have to look at that if you'd want to lower the cost of prisons. That would probably be number one. As far as any other services, you'd have to look at where you can save money as far as how many people do we have devoted to our prisoners, and then coming back to schools, how many people do we have devoted to our students? Where do we want to devote it? I'd agree with Mike. If we have people who have mental health problems, then they ought to be treated in the places where they need treated, and that's not prison. As far as where they need treatment in our local mental health agencies. That's where they get their treatment. And the person best able to make that determination is a psychiatrist on prison entry or a judge. You know, there should be a communication there before sentencing is handed down that says, okay, what's our best form of treatment? And yes, that would save money in the long run.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. We will now move to the portion of the candidates forum focused on the audience questions. Yes, please let the volunteers know that you have those at this time. We will go ahead and begin with question 9. Mr. Miller, you will begin. Do you support no-fault auto insurance reform? Why or why not?
I do support reform because I've talked to people knocking on doors in our district who are moving out of the state because our car insurance is costing too much. Something needs to be done, and what that reform is remains to be seen. But Michigan's no-fault system is the most expensive in the nation. New York's funding, as far as what they will fund for a liable accident, and you have bills that are higher than you can fund or your insurance can fund. That's what PLPD is for. New York is the next highest at $50,000. That's their cap. They're the second highest in the nation, and we are the highest. And that's why we're paying so much. So yes, we need to look at reform. Do we need to be the highest in the nation? If I get in a wreck, my PLPD doesn't pay for my car. I have $1,000 of tort reform max. My PLPD doesn't pay for my car, so what is our car insurance for? Well, it is for those once in a million life-changing experiences where your hospital bill goes out of control. But are we paying too much for that fund? I would say yes, and reform is needed because we're seeing people move out of our state because of high car insurance, and then high property taxes is probably the second one I hear after that. So yes, auto insurance, no-fault reform is needed.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Mr. Morose.
I do believe no fault needs some reform, but I certainly would not throw it all out. There are many good things with no-fault insurance, and I know it's expensive. I took a $200 hit this year with an addition to my with a truck, and that's expensive. I called my insurance agent and said, "What's going on here?" And he explained that there is a fund that is trying to bolster their coffers, and they're charging additional monies because of that. What they want to do is reform no fault by limiting their liability to $50,000. Now, if somebody gets involved in an accident, a serious accident, how far do you think $50,000 is going to go? It's not going to go very far. So what happens to that person? If they only have $50,000 to go toward medical bills, if it's a very serious, say, head injury or something like that, it's going to it cost millions of dollars to keep somebody taken care of for their entire lives. That $50,000 cap just is not functional. What will happen is that person would end up on Medicaid. And people who want to reform no-fault insurance are trying to scale back Medicaid. So if you don't want to increase the Medicaid enrollment, then we need to make sure that there are dollars in place to take care of these people if, God forbid, they're involved in some sort of serious accident. The problem isn't so much with no-fault insurance. There's a committee, and I'm sorry I don't have that in front of you. I should have studied that earlier. But this committee is made up of industry officials. It's not transparent, and we have no ability to look at the books. They are able to set these rates, and we have no ability to look at what and why and how they're setting these rates. So it's the transparency issue that I would look at and make sure this committee is under scrutiny to make sure that there are efficiencies with no fault.
Thank you, Ms. Morose. You will address question 10 first. What position do you take on the legality of gay marriage?
We are either going to be an inclusive society or we're going to be an exclusionary society. Bottom line. And we've realized and learned over the last 200 plus years that being an exclusionary society does not work. By excluding someone based on color, religion, nationality, on and on, does not work. This is one of those items. Interests in the same sex is going to be one of those items as well. So are we going to be inclusionary or exclusionary? I believe that under the law, the law says that we need to treat everyone equally. We need to treat everyone equally regardless. And I believe this is one of those examples. A lot of growing pains going on there, but this is what we've seen over our entire history of the United States. I believe Michigan is under a statutory obligation, constitutional obligation, to say yes. Even though there is a constitutional ban on it right now, we've noticed that, and I'm sure you're all aware, that that is changing, and it's changing very quickly. And the sooner the better. It's time that gay and lesbian, bisexual, transgender are allowed to have equal access to all the things that we all enjoy. And it's a statutory obligation. Now, if a church doesn't want to marry a same-sex couple, well, then that's up to them. But as far as the state's concerned, I believe that everyone has a right to that same equality that the rest of us enjoy.
Thank you, Mr. Morose. Mr. Miller.
Marriage is an institution between a man and a woman, and I firmly believe that and stand behind that. I give up ground in that I believe it should be a state issue. It is not mentioned by our U.S. Constitution and deemed by the 10th Amendment. It is therefore an issue of the states. Massachusetts has said they want it. They should have it. Michigan has decided, the public has decided that marriage is between one man and one woman. And that is their decision. And that's a public decision. And that's the way it should stand.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. You will begin with our next question, and it is on right to work. Do you support or oppose right to work legislation, and why?
I support our right to work legislation. The facts have shown that, actually coincidentally, or maybe not so coincidentally, our population started growing again in 2013, the year that right to work happened to go into effect. Job growth has gone up since we put in right to work. I like stats. Per the U.S. Department of Labor Bureau of Statistics, right-to-work states averaged employment growth at twice the rate of forced unionization states from 1990 to April 2014, and made up 18 of the 25 states with the highest employment growth. That's 72% of those states. Conversely, states that were non-right-to-work for the majority of this period made up all 10 of the states with the least amount of job growth, and 21 of the 25 states with the slowest employment growth. I think the stats speak for themselves. Opponents call it the right to work for less, but the income levels that have increased in right to work states, not just Michigan, speak for themselves. Income has gone up. So it's whether you want to look at the stats and decide on the data or not. The stats speak for themselves that right to work has been effective in the 24 states that have adopted it.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Mr. Morose?
Interesting, I have different stats. And these come from the U.S. Bureau of the Census, comes from the National Vital Statistics System, U.S. Department of Commerce. So let me run you through my stats. Income per person in a free state. And a free state is a free bargaining state where you can actually bargain for your item. Income per person. Free states average $38,000. Right-to-work states, $33,000. Poverty rates, free states, 12%. Right-to-work, 14%. So that's much higher. Deaths per 1,000, live births, free states, 6.6. Right-to-work states, 7.3. What that points to is poverty level. Right there. Poverty level drives up your deaths per live birth. School dropout rates, free states, 8.6, with right-to-work states at 10.2. That comes from the census population. Health insurance, job fatalities, here's another one. Free states, 4 per 100,000 job fatalities, where right-to-work states are 6. So my stats say a lot different than Aaron's. But let me say this, right-to-work is wrong for Michigan. The governor said he would not touch it because it was too divisive. But he was pressured by the powers that be that if he wasn't going to take this on, he wasn't going to get funding for this campaign. And so he had to take it on. But he did admit that it was too divisive and didn't want to touch it. But businesses don't want to come to a state with this type of divisiveness among labor. Let's be fair to our labor. Let's make sure that if you get a service for being in a shop and a union is bargaining for your well-being, that by golly, you should pay it. You should pay as you go if you're going to get these services. I will repeal, and I've said this before, I will support repealing right to work.
We'll have our organizations get together and speak sometime on that.
No rebuttals, please. All right, Mr. Morose, you will address the next question first. Have you accepted money from PACs or other special interest groups? If so, would you name them?
Yes, I have, and I'm not ashamed to say so. I've accepted money from UAW Cap Council, and I've accepted money from the Michigan Motorcycle Writers Association, and I previously accepted money from the MEA, the Michigan Education Association. And I'm not ashamed to say that. These are people that are in my district. I'm standing shoulder to shoulder with them, and they are standing shoulder to shoulder with me with finances. That's the way the system works. You don't bring a knife to a gunfight, as they say, and this is one of those processes that happen. This isn't some outside special interest group from out of state. These are local, statewide groups that have people, friends, constituents right here in this district. I know them. I'm friends with them. I'm family with a lot of them, and I'm not opposed to taking contributions so that it will help me become reelected so I can help them out on a local level and make their lives even better. And from what I understand as well, Vision for Victory has given Aaron $1,000. Nesbitt Majority Fund, I understand, has given Aaron $1,000. And Michigan Values Leadership Fund has given Aaron $500. I'll let him speak to those. But that's the system we live in.
Thank you, Mr. Morose. Mr. Miller.
Absolutely. We have, before we made our campaign pledge, we did accept money from independent political committees whose interest is electing Republicans. And since that time, we made a pledge that we would not take any money from special interest advocacy groups, which is a different entity that we have identified. And we have not since taken any money since making that pledge from advocacy groups from Lansing, because for the simple reason that we think it makes me accountable to the voters only, ultimately, when I get up to Lansing, if that's the case. It makes me accountable to the voters who elected me, instead of lobbyists waiting outside the session halls or anybody else.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. You will begin with question 13. What is your stand on Second Amendment gun rights, including concealed carry and guns in schools, churches, and private businesses?
I believe that our Second Amendment gives upright individuals the right to carry firearms, plain and simple. As far as concealed carry permit holders are lawfully trained, licensed gun holders that are allowed by Michigan state law and most other states in the nation now to carry a firearm on their person. And generally, the stats have shown that gun-free zones, that's where the shootings happen. Gun zones, that's where the shootings don't happen, and I don't think that it's a coincidence. I stand up for concealed carry in businesses, churches, schools, should they choose to allow that in their building. I believe it's a matter of choice. I believe a business should have the power to say no, it should have the power to say yes. I believe that a school is the same thing. In Newtown, you had a registered weapon. You had a registered weapon holder, mom took care of the gun, and still it happened. There was a buzzer system at Newtown, and still it happened. So, do we want to allow criminals everywhere with guns, as it currently is? Or do we want to also make it a level playing field and let the good guys who are trained and licensed in there as well to stop a shooting like that? And absolutely, yes, we do.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Mr. Morose.
First of all, I would like to say I am a gun owner, and I have been my entire life. I own a pistol, I've owned shotguns, rifles, still do. I even had a permit to carry in Indiana before Michigan changed its law. So I am definitely a gun advocate, and I support the right of people to own guns. But guns in schools, I have a real big problem with, and I would have to say I oppose that. I don't believe that that's the environment for a firearm. Teachers and school administrators have enough to worry about than people walking through their halls. It's going to disrupt the learning experience of the child, even if it is concealed, because there's going to be knowledge of people being able to carry, or if someone's jacket opens up and a child sees the firearm and whatnot. I think that's disruptive to the learning experience of the child. So I would oppose that. Imagine sports arenas. We hear of beatings all the time, these fights breaking out at sports arenas. I mean, we have had a person who was, I heard, killed here recently during a fist fight. There's another person who just received severe beatings, a near-death experience from a sporting event, a rivalry gone bad. Imagine if they had firearms on them, how far that would have taken. And it's not just the people who are involved in the fight, it's the bystander, the bullets that fly by. That's a scary proposition. The Utah teacher who dropped her firearm in the bathroom when it discharged. Luckily, she was not in the classroom, because God forbid what would have happened there. And finally, let's put our money where our mouths are if we really want a safe school. Let's have a police officer in every school, or at least every school district, so that police officer can rotate from school to school.
Thank you, Mr. Morose. You will address the next question first, and it's about robotics and job displacement, rather. As robotics increasingly replace workers, for example, the do-it-yourself checkout lines in the local Meijer, is the church the top choice to assist displaced workers? Does it have the capacity? And if not, what are your recommendations?
Well, I would say churches serve a wonderful function when it comes to not just worship, but social assistance. And thank God for the churches we have here locally that really put out the food pantries and the blankets and assistance. And we're very fortunate to have that opportunity. But to think that they could take care of all of society, there aren't enough churches, and those churches don't have enough money to take care of it. So as far as displacement goes, that's where we need the system. The system comes from the government. The government needs to be able to have to create an environment of re-education. If someone should lose their job, that they can be re-educated into something else. To give you an example, I could name probably 10 people off the top of my head who lost their jobs during the recession. And they were able to go back and re-educate themselves. And they lost their jobs not because of what they did, it was the economy. And they went back and became an electrician. One of my buddy Mike is now an electrician. He's been working a lot of hours and he's doing really well. But there needs to be those programs that bring the displaced worker back into the workforce and back into to society. And keep them off welfare. But we do need to have that social safety net. The social safety net is very important for the transition. We can't just let them fall on the hard pavement. Mike has kids. Mike has a wife. He had to feed them. He had to take care of them. And she was working part-time, but working part-time at $7 an hour just wasn't cutting it. So they did have that social safety net. They used it for a period of time, and they were able to transition to now he's working. That's the type of items we need to have. And I think the government can facilitate that and at least create an environment, a structure for this to happen.
Thank you, Mr. Morose. Mr. Miller?
Churches and mosques and synagogues and any other religious institution for that matter definitely is a good primary form of reaching out to people in a case like that. They lose their job to robotics. That's a great form of reaching out, but definitely not the only one. We do have a social safety net, and that is, if you're unemployed, there's an unemployment office that you go to and they help you find a job. It ought to be looking at the next step, not just giving you a handout, but looking at the next step of what's next. Hey, where can we put you in? Can we find you a job in your present vocation, or do you need training to go on to the next vocation? And definitely, that's what those offices are there for finding those people jobs like that, for finding them the next step in life. What's next?
Thank you, Mr. Miller. You will begin with our next question. The state budget for mental health has been reduced over the years. What would you do to address the needs of people with mental health issues?
I think it does take funding. I think it takes funding, staff enough to respond to those needs. And we have St. Joseph County Mental Health in Centerville, and they do respond to those needs. And yes, it does take funding. And it takes looking at solutions of how can we help our citizens best, whether that's medication or whether that's other treatment, psychiatric treatment. We need to look at the best solution, and yes, it does take funding, absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Mr. Morose?
We need to identify those that have mental illness. I think that's one of our biggest problems is identifying. Now, a lot of these people, there's such a stigma to mental health that they don't come out and look for help. So it's identification. Identifying those people, I think, probably would be the most critical. Either allowing an opportunity for that person to reach out without being scrutinized, without being ridiculed that they have an issue, so that they can come to a department, they can actually walk through the door and say, and with arms open, without the criticism and ridicule. So identifying those people, first of all, and then providing the standard of living for them. A lot of these people are either living on the streets, a lot of them just don't know how to function. as all of us take for granted. So just giving them an opportunity to have a normal life, giving them an opportunity to have something to be excited about, giving them an opportunity to function in society through different programs. And all of that must be funded. It's amazing to me, the mental health issue that has really exploded. I don't know that that it's an increase other than we're starting to identify it more often. And so I think we need to put far more funds into mental health programs and certainly not take them away. And let me say this when it comes to guns. They're kind of tied together here. A lot of this gun violence we were talking about just a couple minutes ago are not it's not a gun issue, it's a mental health issue. And so I think funding mental health programs is an absolute must. And I think we have programs in place already in Cass and St. Joseph counties. We've got a great director over there, Liz Odell, fantastic director, and here as well in Cass, that are doing a bang-up job. They just don't have the funds right now.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Moroz, you will address the next question first. How important is separation of state and church to you?
I think it's critical. I think it's absolutely critical, and so did our founding fathers. The problem in England when they came over here was that the religion was kind of overbearing on the people. So they came here and established a system, and it's not so much a separation as it is a balance. It's an actual balance, and my friend Burke here could tell us more about it, and I've learned a lot from him as well on this. But it's a balance between being able to allow the state to function without interference, but allowing those religions to function by themselves. But when it comes to control, when it comes to basing an opinion, I was raised a Christian. I am a Christian, and I thank my mother for that. And I'll tell you what, that's in my life every day. I pray every day, and I'm very thankful for that. But when I go to Lansing, I represent everybody. I represent everyone, whether you're a Christian or a non-Christian, whether you're a deist or anything else. I'm here to represent everyone. That would be my job as a representative. So I would definitely use it in my personal and spiritual life. For me, it's a very private thing, and for me to speak in front of you like this is quite new to me. But I would definitely keep that to myself, but not impose that on my constituents.
Thank you, Mr. Moroz. Mr. Miller?
The separation of church and state is important to me because it keeps the church out of government affairs and it keeps the government out of church affairs. And that's the way it should be, absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. You will address our next question first. Sort of goes off of one of the earlier questions. What is your position on universal background checks for all gun owners?
You awake now?
I support universal background checks for gun owners because it keeps guns out of the wrong hands. It has been a little unclear as far as what I do believe on that, and a lot of people have decided what I believe on that. But I believe background checks are the number one first responder to guns being in the wrong hands. And I think that is a good process for who should be able to buy a gun. And so I do believe in background checks. And I believe in them for guns where background checks are not required right now. I believe that background checks are a good thing. They are good for all of us. They're good for the buyer, they're good for the seller, they're good for everybody involved. They aren't required right now at gun shows, but they should be. They keep guns out of the wrong hands. They're not government intruding into our lives. They're making sure guns don't fall into the wrong hands. So I support that.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Mr. Moroz?
Yeah, speaking of the mental health issue, we must keep guns out of those who are mentally deranged or violently mentally ill. So I would definitely support the background checks and keep those guns out of the hands of those potential violators.
Thank you, Mr. Moroz. You will address the next question first. What is your opinion of civil disobedience to protect citizens' rights?
That's one I haven't studied. But we read a lot about it in school, didn't we? There was a lot of civil disobedience throughout the ages. Definitely the most frequent, or the most current, would have been, I would say, in the 60s, where the civil disobedience really changed society. And I think there are times where we need to be disobedient. There are times when a tyrannical government comes along, and we need to show and rise up and show the tyrannical government that we mean business. I hope we're not headed that way. It kind of feels like it sometimes, doesn't it, when there are impositions placed on us, when we have our hands tied when it comes to fracking, for instance, where we don't have a voice in what type of well is going to be put in our backyard. It's scary when our rights are slowly being taken away. What other recourse do we have? Of course it would be nonviolent, but it would be something that would use a show of force, a show of numbers, peacefully, so that we could change the course of something that somehow, because of a manipulated political system, is out of our control. And that's where we're headed. Our political system has become wrought with money and gerrymandering, and our voices are being circumvented. And it's time that we consider alternatives, peaceful alternatives, so that we can change the course. I believe in the right to petition. I believe in the right to assemble. I believe in the ability to bargain collectively. All of those, I believe, are true American values and true values that we should be able to exercise at any moment.
Thank you, Mr. Morose. Mr. Miller?
If rights are being violated under the law, then yes, that's where civil disobedience plays a part. And a prime example would be how our country came into being. Our citizens here in the American colonies thought that their rights under the law were being violated and that they were not being given due process under the existing English law. And you call the revolution a revolution or call it civil disobedience. Yes, when our rights are being violated, yes, we do need to stand up and civilly disobey. Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. You will address our last question of the night first. What are your positions on the American Legislative Exchange Network?
Can't say I'm familiar with that organization, so I can't give an answer to that which I don't know.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Mr. Morose?
I believe, I don't know, I haven't heard of the network, but I've heard of the American Legislative Exchange Commission. So if that's the question, that is a body of conservative think tank, which basically they create legislation based on political ideology, and they hand it to those members who are members of various state legislatures. Those members then take that and oftentimes without reading the legislation will basically rubber stamp it because they're members of a particular committee, will rubber stamp that legislation and pass it on to the governor. What we've seen is the fact that ALEC has taken over a lot of the state legislatures. That's why you've seen the extremism in some of these laws that have come down since 2010. The extremism of the various very ideological and philosophical instead of actual workings of the political process. Instead of seeing how it affects you, instead of seeing how it affects our department, a lot of this is strictly driven from the top. ALEC is that type of organization. Our current representative, Matt Laurie, is a member of ALEC. And he was one, and if you look at his voting record, and this is why I ran against him 2 years ago, if you look at his voting record, it was right in lockstep. And this legislation is absolutely verbatim from state to state to state. How does that happen if you're writing it by yourself, if you have a committee of people? It's not. It's being distributed throughout the organization called ALEC. And I don't believe that's representation. I would never become a member of ALEC. And I think ALEC needs to have its wings clipped because it has really impaired our political system.
Thank you, Mr. Morose. That concludes the audience question portion of the forum. We will now have the candidates give 2 minutes of closing remarks, beginning with Mr. Morose.
I would like to thank all of you in the audience tonight and those listening on WGTO radio for taking a sincere interest in the political process. Elections have consequences, and our future is in your hands, and I thank you for being an informed voter. I caution voters to not be a one-issue voter, but look at all of the issues when voting because they are all connected. I am asking voters to look past the letter next to a candidate's name and actually look at the candidate. Ask yourself, who has the most experience and who is going to be the most effective at representing the people and rebuilding the hardworking middle class, because that is where most of us are, in the middle. I know what it is like to work in factories, I know what it's like to work in offices, and I know what it takes to start and own a business during some of the best and worst economic times we've ever seen. Currently, I'm serving my community, volunteering to revitalize our local historic district of Cassopolis and Vandalia. I'm president of the Underground Railroad Society of Cass County, and I'm on the committee to save the 1899 Cass County Courthouse. Work experience, business experience, life experience, and community volunteerism. I know the challenges of being a member of the hardworking middle. I am committed to making our system fair for everyone by creating good-paying jobs, encouraging business growth and the entrepreneurial spirit, educating and training a qualified workforce through a strong, well-supported public education system while defending the rights and benefits of educators, labor, and the hardworking middle class. I'm asking for your vote on November 4th, and thank you all so very much.
Thank you, Mr. Morose. Mr. Miller.
Thank you very much for coming out also. Thank you to the league for hosting. I'm not afraid of going off the beaten path, of not doing things the way they've always been done. I was advised by many not to take the campaign money pledge that we took, but I did it because I'm headlining our responsiveness to the voters. We have a responsibility to represent the voters, and that's why I took that pledge. And so, rather than just being in the convenient path, I'd rather be in the right path. I'm an algebra teacher, and I use my skill levels to teach students to think critically, to solve problems in real life. And I would like to use those skills to solve Lansing problems and work not for the lobbyists, not for anybody else, not for Lansing, but for the people primarily. That's it. I have the energy to do that, and I am unorthodox in that I'm willing to stand up to the way that it's been done, just because that's the way it's been done. I want to take the right path. And so again, I ask you also for your support on November 4th. Thank you to everybody for coming out, and thank you to the league.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Now it's time for that round of applause for both candidates. And I would ask you to give yourself a round of applause for taking the time to come out and participate tonight. That brings us to the end of our debate. Remember to vote on Tuesday, November 4th, and encourage all voters in the district to do so. Thank you, and be safe. Good luck to you.
Great job.
Good luck to you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. Aaron?